Welcome to our video series here at National Drug Screening. Employers have lots of questions about drug testing, especially in this ever-changing world. One of the things we're going to be talking about today in this particular video is common drug testing panels and specimen types. What should you be using, what should you not be using, and what you need to know. So welcome to this video series. Today in the studios with us as our president of National Drug Screening, Mr. Joe Reilly. Mr. Reilly has been in the drug testing industry since 1993. He's implemented drug testing programs and policies for companies not only across the state of Florida, where he first launched his first company, but also all over the United States. He's also served as an expert witness, provided webinars, trainings for organizations, including governmental agencies all across the country. And one of the big things that changes coming up these days for employers is specimen types. You know, people are asking about what drug test panel do we need, what specimen types do we need. So thank you, Mr. Reilly, for jumping into the video series with us and sharing your insights.
Pleasure to be here and answer questions about drug test panels and specimen types.
Absolutely. And these are some of the common questions that we get from employer clients. We do work with employers all over the country. And so one of the first questions we get are, what are the common drug testing panels or the most common ones used in drug-free workplace programs these days?
Okay, so the most common drug testing panel, which is also used for all DOT-regulated drug testing, but also used for non-regulated business, is what we call the 5-panel drug test. Mm-hmm. And the 5-panel drug test includes marijuana, cocaine, amphetamines, pencyclidine or PCP, and opiates. And when we talk about the amphetamines, it adds MDA, which is ecstasy, and it adds methamphetamines. When we talk about the opioids, we're talking about codeine, morphine, heroin, oxycodone, hydrocodone, oxymorphone, hydromorphone. There's actually a whole bunch of drugs there. You could count them up and you could get to 12, and some people call it a 12 panel and some people call it a 7 panel. But the laboratories that do the drug testing and the DOT that regulates the specific panel for DOT companies, they call it a 5 panel. So that's the standard drug testing panel that we see. It's been around since drug testing started back in the late 80s. It has expanded a little bit. They didn't always have heroin in there. They didn't always have methamphetamine in there. They didn't always have ecstasy in there. And they didn't always have the hydrocodones and the oxycodones and the oxymorphones and the hydromorphones. Mm-hmm. So that all happened, those expanded opiates, around 2018, about the time of the big pill mill situation and the overprescribing of opioids throughout the United States. So for DOT, you got to use that DOT 5-panel test. For non-DOT, most companies say, well, what should I do? You know, they don't know. And we say, well, one option is to do what DOT requires and to do your standard 5-panel test, your marijuana, cocaine, amphetamines, opiates, and PCP, pencyclidine. But you can go to what is commonly called a 10-panel test, okay? So you're adding benzodiazepines, barbiturates, methaqualone, methadone, and what's that last one?
Propoxyphene.
Thank you, Tom. So that's a standard 10-panel. Now what's interesting is the laboratories, you know, the 5-panel is, they know what it is, and the 10-panel, they know what it is, but if you were to say to me, Joe, I need a 12-panel, I would have to say, well, Tom, I need to know the drugs you want. I need to know the 12 drugs you want, because there's not a standard 12-panel, 11-panel, 13-panel. Right. So let's say you wanted a 13-panel. Well, yeah, well, we want a 13-panel. We want the 10-panel, but we also want fentanyl and mepridine and tramadol. Okay, but it's not called a 13-panel. It's called a 10-panel plus mepridine and tramadol and fentanyl. And fentanyl is becoming a popular drug to test for because, as we know, We got a big fentanyl problem in this country right now with fentanyl coming across the border.
Yeah, and I think you had some great points there that, for DOT testing, you have, the very specific panels. You can't test for more, you can't test for less, you test for what the government tells you to test for. And then for those non-regulated panels, having different things, is it just an employer's choice to do those different things? Or are there sometimes they have like a union contract or a state law that may affect, what panel that they can test for?
Yeah, it could be any of those. It could be based on the employer's choice. Maybe there's a particular drug in their community that people are using more of.
Right.
It could be because of a state program that requires something for to get a state incentive for implementing a drug-free workplace. We see in the medical industry, particularly hospitals, they're going with an expanded panel, like over and above the 10 panel. They're adding those fentanyls and mepridines and tramadols and maybe other drugs, because in a hospital there's a whole closet full of drugs that people may steal and use and subvert. So they may be using 17 different drugs. So it really depends. But again, most often we see the 5-panel.
Right. And I know there's just, those exceptions that come out there that we work, because we work with customers all over the country, and you have some of those expanded panels like the big chemical companies that might do 32 panel, or 32 drug tests and those kind of crazy things. But there's pretty much common ones that most of the non-regulated testing, use that are fairly common in there. So besides that, the big thing these days is also with specimen type. So how do you do the drug test? Because we know the panel, we know the drugs you're testing for. You have different reasons where you might test for them. Are there restrictions on certain specimen types or recommended specimen types? Or, tell me, how that actually applies for the drug testing for employers.
Yeah, specimen types is a good topic, but I just want to go back for just a few seconds, is that in the non-DOT world, the non-regulated world, sometimes people are doing a 4-panel or a 9-panel. They're dropping marijuana from the panel. And they can do that if they elect to do that. Not for DOT, but they can do that in non-DOT. So specimen types. So traditionally, since the late 80s, when drug testing started in businesses in the United States, urine has been the specimen. Okay. For DOT testing, urine is currently the specimen. Right now, today as we speak, we use urine for a DOT test. We use a breathalyzer for an alcohol test. Okay. Now going back to DOT for just a few seconds here, because folks in the audience may have heard that DOT allows oral fluid now. They do, but it's not operational yet at the laboratories. Sometime next year, sometime in 2024, we will see the launching of oral fluid testing for DOT. Now, for non-DOT, non-regulated, unless there's a state law or state law program, urine is not the only game in town. Okay. Oral fluid for non-DOT has been around for 15 plus years. Basically, we're collecting oral fluid on a device. I call it a sponge on a stick. Goes in the mouth, it comes out, it goes in a tube, it gets shipped to the laboratory. They do initial testing just like they would on a urine specimen. They do confirmation testing if it's positive, and then those results go to a medical review officer for review and verification and reporting. So you have oral fluid testing. So urine, oral fluid, and hair testing. Hair testing's been around for a good 10 plus years. The major difference with hair testing, again, it's non-DOT only. Hair testing is detecting drugs from 7 days out. So it's not detecting drugs I did yesterday. It's about 7 days out to about 90 days out. So if you want to find out if your candidate used drugs last month or the month before or the third month back, hair testing is an option. Hair testing is more expensive, but it gives you that up to 90-day look-back period. Both oral fluid and hair testing are specimen types where cheating is very difficult.
So let me ask you this, why would it be maybe easier to cheat a urine drug screen, or maybe ask a different way, why would it be more maybe either, I don't know if accurate would be the right word, or more reliable potentially for using oral fluid, because that's kind of a big thing these days. Can you share kind of why that might be something that's going to be kind of more toward the future?
Absolutely. So First off, on the cheating, with collecting a urine specimen, the person goes into a bathroom in privacy. So we don't know what they got strapped onto their body or hidden under in their boots or whatever. With hair testing and oral fluid testing, the collection is done right in front of the person that's administering the testing. Now, we get the question all the time, what's more accurate? Urine, oral fluid, hair, even blood. Because you can do blood drug testing, but it's not done much because it's invasive, you need a phlebotomist, and it's very expensive. It's about 3 times more than a urine drug test. Okay, but with oral fluid, the main difference with oral fluid, it's detecting very recent drug use. Like I smoked a joint this morning on my way to work, it's going to detect it. With urine, it may take a day for that THC to metabolize in my body. With hair, it's going to take 7 days. So with oral fluid, might be more appropriate for a post-accident test or a reasonable suspicion test because there's a shorter window of detection starting a couple of hours after drug use, but only going back to about 2.5 days. With hair, again, we got the longer window of detection going back to approximately 90 days. With urine, we're typically going back anywhere from 2 to 5, 6 days.
So you've got urine testing primarily, urine, hair, and an oral fluid, all those coming out these days. So I know one of the questions we get from employers all the time is, which one do I do? Or do I do a combination of these things? Or does it depend on what I'm trying to accomplish? Or, does it depend on the law? What should I choose?
Yeah. So it always depends on what you're trying to accomplish, okay? But in some cases, it might be more appropriate to use a mixture of 2 specimen types, like oral fluid testing for reasonable suspicion and post-accident. And it's even more convenient because it's an easy collection that an employer can do themselves. Rather than you have an accident at 2 o'clock in the morning, you're not going to be able to get a urine drug test done unless you call out a mobile collector for $300, $400, $500. Okay. Some companies just want to stay with the traditional, tried and true urine testing. It's been around for 30 plus years. It holds up in court. There's a lot of case law. Oral fluid and hair are newer. There's not as much case law, but they hold up in court. We actually have trucking companies in the United States, some of the very large trucking companies that are required to do DOT testing. They do their DOT urine test, and then they follow that up with a hair test because they don't want to hire a guy and put him behind the wheel of a 45,000-pound rig and find out that he's able to cheat on the urine test, but he's been using drugs all along, and the hair test will pick that up.
Yeah, so something for instance, for the hair testing, I would imagine that you could, potentially with certain drugs, you could stop using for a short period of time and oral fluid doesn't show up and urine doesn't, but then the hair is going to get them.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and so, one of the things that you mentioned was some of the legal things that are going on. So with the changes in marijuana laws, is that actually going to change? Obviously, in some videos we've talked about it changing drug testing, but does that affect the specimen type that you might need to use depending on the circumstance?
Well, it absolutely may when it comes to marijuana. So when we do a urine test, we will back up. If I use drugs, if I use marijuana, I smoke it or I eat an edible, that substance is metabolizing in my body and then getting into my urine as a metabolite. Okay, so it's not really THC, it's the metabolite of THC. Now, I'm not a chemist, but if you talk to a chemist and somebody that knows body chemistry, they could tell you a lot more. But again, it takes a day or so for that metabolite to be in the urine. Okay, well, with marijuana, in states where marijuana is legal, they're starting to pass laws that say you can't penalize someone for smoking pot on the weekends. And a urine test on a Monday or a Tuesday will detect that someone smoked pot on Friday or Saturday or Sunday. Now, we don't know what day they did it. We just know it's in their system. Okay? Oral fluid, remember we said it can detect like within a few hours. And with oral fluid, it's not a metabolite. Oral fluid is picking up the parent drug that's embedded into your saliva. So oral fluid may be a better specimen type for marijuana testing. There's also in development, not yet available, there are folks that are trying to get a marijuana breathalyzer going. Okay, now if they can get approvals for that and they can get the trials and it works and it's approved by the FDA, that's a multi-billion-dollar idea right there. And there are several companies that are kind of getting there, but not yet there. Okay, so the options right now are check the state laws where you are. Okay, what are their restrictions? What's maybe some case law? Okay, either test for marijuana, don't test for marijuana, maybe go to oral fluid for marijuana, check the state law again, check the case law again. And my biggest advice to companies, this is kind of off topic a little bit, is no matter where you are, if you have a marijuana positive, before you fire that person, have a conversation with HR and leadership and with that employee to determine what's going on, what's the state law, what's the situation.
Yeah, I think that's great insight, to make sure they're actually prepared. And you mentioned, a few things, early on about changing trends and changing laws that affected the panels, like adding opioids back in 2018. And then with all the changes with marijuana, that's influenced